The first hint that something was wrong came in the form of a text message not meant for me. I was watering the hydrangeas in our garden when my husband's phone buzzed on the patio table. 42 years of marriage had erased any boundaries between us, so I glanced at the screen without a second thought. "Can't wait for our new life to begin," it read. The sender was listed as LM. The message preview continued. "Just a few more weeks and we can stop pretending." My hand trembled as I set the watering can down. Water sloshed over the rim, darkening the flagstone beneath my feet. I stared at the phone until the screen went dark, then at the back door where Gerald had disappeared just minutes earlier to take a shower. I was 67 years old, with silver-streaked hair I'd long ago stopped dyeing, and hands that bore the marks of decades of gardening, cooking, and raising our 3 children. Gerald and I had built everything together since we were 25, this colonial house in Oakwood Heights, with its sprawling garden, our investment portfolio, our reputation in the community. We'd weathered every storm together. The loss of his parents, my breast cancer scare 15 years ago, our youngest son's struggle with addiction. Or so I thought. I picked up the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. In 42 years, I had never once snooped through Gerald's private messages. Trust had been our foundation. But that text message had cracked something open inside me, releasing a flood of small observations I'd been dismissing for months. The late nights at the office, the new cologne, the sudden interest in his appearance that had him joining a gym at 68. Before I could decide what to do, the screen lit up with another message from LM. "Did you tell her yet? You promised it would be this week." My stomach clenched as I set the phone down exactly as I'd found it. I straightened my gardening apron and walked inside, my mind racing. LM. The initials tumbled through my thoughts as I mechanically washed my hands at the kitchen sink. Who was LM? And what exactly had Gerald promised to tell me? I heard the shower shut off upstairs. In 15 minutes, Gerald would come downstairs in his casual Friday clothes, pour himself a cup of coffee, and kiss me on the cheek before heading to the investment firm he'd helped build from the ground up. The firm where he was now the senior partner, respected throughout the financial community, his name etched in gold on the door. The firm where his executive assistant, Lisa Mercer, had worked for the past 5 years. LM. I gripped the edge of the sink, suddenly feeling every one of my 67 years. Lisa was 39, divorced with no children. She had sleek blonde hair, wore tailored dresses that showcased her Pilates-toned figure, and called me Mrs. H with a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she saw me at company functions. I heard Gerald's footsteps on the stairs and quickly busied myself with making coffee. When he entered the kitchen, I could smell his expensive aftershave, the one I'd given him for Christmas, though he'd rarely used it until recently. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, his voice carefully neutral. He poured himself coffee, added a splash of the almond milk he'd switched to 6 months ago as part of his health kick. "Good morning," I replied, studying him from the corner of my eye. His silver hair was freshly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. The navy blue polo shirt he wore was new. I didn't recognize it from doing the laundry. "You're dressed up for a Friday at the office." "Board meeting," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Might run late tonight." Of course it would. Like the past 12 Friday nights. "Gerald," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "is there something you need to tell me?" His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. For a moment, I saw panic flash across his face before he composed himself. "What do you mean?" "You've been distant lately, working late. I just wondered if everything was all right." He set his cup down and finally looked at me. I searched his face, the face I'd woken up to for more than 4 decades, the face that had aged alongside mine through joy and hardship. His eyes, once so open to me, now held something guarded. "Everything's fine, Ellie," he said. using my nickname for the first time in weeks. Just busy with the Wilson account, you know how it is. I did know. I'd been hearing about the Wilson account for months, but the Wilson account didn't send text messages signed LM. All right, I said, turning away to hide the hurt in my eyes. Have a good day. He hesitated, then leaned in to kiss my cheek. His lips barely grazed my skin before he was gone, the front door closing behind him with a decisive click. I stood in our kitchen, the kitchen we'd remodeled together 10 years ago, arguing good-naturedly over granite versus quartz countertops and felt something inside me harden. 42 years. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a lifetime of memories, and he couldn't even look me in the eye. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out the small fireproof safe where we kept our important documents. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed the combination our wedding anniversary, a date I wondered if Gerald even remembered anymore. Inside were our passports, birth certificates, the deed to our house, and our financial records. I'd always left the finances to Gerald. He was the investment expert after all. I'd been a high school English teacher before retiring 10 years ago, and while I wasn't financially naive, I'd trusted him to manage our portfolio. Now, for the first time in decades, I began to systematically go through every document, making notes on a legal pad. 3 hours later, I sat back, my notes spread across the dining room table. What I'd discovered sent a chill through me. Our joint accounts showed regular withdrawals small enough not to raise immediate alarm, but consistent. Over the past year, nearly $200,000 had been siphoned away. The quarterly statements from our investment portfolio showed similar discrepancies. Gerald was moving money, preparing for something. I reached for my cell phone and called our son Michael, the only one of our children who had followed his father into finance. "Mom?" he answered on the third ring, sounding surprised. I rarely call during his workday. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice light. "I just had a question about investments. Your father is tied up with the Wilson account, and I didn't want to bother him." "Sure, what's up?" "If someone wanted to move money without their spouse knowing, how would they do it?" The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "Mom, what's going on?" "Just curious," I said. "For my novel." The novel was my cover story for many things these days, the retirement project I'd been working on for years but had never actually started. Michael sighed. "Well, they might make small withdrawals over time to avoid triggering any alerts. They could open separate accounts or investments in just their name. Maybe convert assets to cash or transfer them to offshore accounts if they're really serious." He paused. "Mom, is Dad?" "Thank you, sweetheart," I interrupted. "That's very helpful for my character development. How are the kids? Is Emma excited about her piano recital?" He allowed me to change the subject, but I could hear the concern in his voice. After we hung up, I sat staring at my notes, a plan beginning to form in my mind. Gerald had taught me one valuable lesson over the years. Knowledge is power, and now I needed to know everything. I spent the next week in reconnaissance mode. I hired a private investigator paying in cash from my personal savings account that Gerald didn't know about, money I'd squirreled away from teaching piano lessons after retirement. I forwarded Gerald's emails to my account using the password he'd never bothered to change, our first dog's name and our wedding year. I installed a tracking app on his phone while he was sleeping. Each discovery was another knife in my heart. The private investigator's photos showed Gerald and Lisa entering a luxury apartment building downtown. His emails revealed flight searches for 2 to Belize. The tracking app showed regular visits to a jeweler known for custom engagement rings. The final confirmation came when I followed him myself on a Tuesday afternoon when he claimed to have a doctor's appointment. I watched from across the street as he and Lisa emerged from the Oakwood Heights First National Bank. Even from a distance, I could see their expressions, the secret smiles, the casual intimacy of his hand on the small of her back. I'd given this man my youth, my middle age, and now the beginning of my golden years. I'd supported his career, raised his children, maintained his home, and stood by him through every challenge. And his response to all of it was to plan a new life with a woman nearly 30 years my junior. That night, I served Gerald's favorite meal, beef bourguignon with crusty bread and a bottle of the Bordeaux we'd brought back from our 35th anniversary trip to France. I wore the blue dress he'd always loved and even put on makeup. He noticed none of it, his mind clearly elsewhere as he checked his phone every few minutes. "Gerald," I said as I refilled his wineglass, "do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" He looked up, momentarily startled. "That was a long time ago, Ellie. You said, 'Everything I am and everything I will become belongs to you.' Do you remember that?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Why are you bringing this up now?" "Because I've been thinking about promises lately, the ones we keep and the ones we break." I took a sip of my wine, watching him over the rim of my glass. The Wilson account must be quite demanding. All those late nights, all those urgent meetings. His face paled slightly. "Eleanor." "It's strange, though," I continued as if he hadn't spoken, "because I called your office last Friday during your board meeting. Marjorie said there was no board meeting scheduled and you'd left at 3 o'clock. The color drained entirely from his face now. "I can explain." "Can you explain the apartment on Riverside Drive, or the money you've been moving from our joint accounts, or perhaps the text from Lisa Mercer about your new life together?" He set down his fork with a clatter. "You've been spying on me?" "No, Gerald. I've been waking up." I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my plate. "How long have you been planning to leave me?" He stared at me for a long moment, then seemed to deflate. "It's not what you think." "Isn't it? You're having an affair with your executive assistant. You're planning to leave me for her. You've been systematically moving our money to accounts I don't have access to. What part am I misunderstanding?" "I was going to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When? After you'd taken everything? After you'd moved in with her? Or were you planning to wait until you transferred enough of our assets that I'd be left with nothing?" "I would never leave you with nothing," he protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. "Wouldn't you? The condo in Florida is now solely in your name. Our investment portfolio has been systematically drained. Even our joint checking account has half of what it had a year ago." I leaned forward. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you just assume I was too old and trusting to check?" "Eleanor, please." "How much does she know about your plans?" I asked. "Does Lisa understand that you're dismantling our life together piece by piece? Does she know about the offshore account in the Caymans?" His head snapped up. "How did you?" "I know everything, Gerald. Every transfer, every meeting, every lie." I stood up, my legs steadier than I expected. "What I don't know is why." "After 42 years, why?" He looked down at his half-eaten meal. "She makes me feel young again." The simplicity of his answer stunned me. All of this, the betrayal, the deception, the calculated financial maneuvers, because a younger woman made him feel temporarily unbound by time. "And what about me?" I asked. "What am I supposed to feel?" "I never meant to hurt you," he said, the most predictable line in the adulterer's handbook. "But you did plan to rob me," I replied. "You did mean to do that." "It's not robbery. I earned that money." And there it was. After 42 years of partnership, in his mind, everything was his. My contributions raising our children, maintaining our home, supporting his career, investing my teacher's pension into our joint accounts meant nothing. "I'm sure Lisa is waiting." Confusion crossed his face. "What?" "Go to her, Gerald. Tonight. Now." Eleanor, be reasonable. We need to discuss this like adults. Like the adult who's been sneaking around behind his wife's back, or the adult who's been embezzling from our joint accounts. I walked to the front door and opened it. I want you out of this house tonight. You can't just throw me out. This is my house too. Until we sort out the finances, I think it's best if you stay elsewhere. A restraining order? On what grounds? Financial abuse is still abuse, Gerald, and I have documentation of every penny you've moved without my knowledge or consent. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. For decades, I'd been the supportive wife, the steady partner who handled the household while he built his career. He'd forgotten that before I was his wife, I was Eleanor Harrington, graduated summa cum laude, the woman who'd organized protests in college and once debated the governor on educational funding. You wouldn't, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. I already have. I gestured to the door. You can pack a bag or you can leave as you are, but you are leaving. For a moment, I thought he might argue further. Instead, he walked past me without another word and up the stairs. 20 minutes later, he came down with a suitcase. He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. This isn't over, Eleanor. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, finally allowing the tears to come. I cried for the young couple we'd once been, for the middle-aged partners who'd raised children and built a life, and for the older woman I now was, facing a future I'd never imagined. But as the tears subsided, another emotion took their place: determination. Gerald thought he could discard me and take everything we'd built together. He was about to discover how wrong he was. I walked to the study and opened my laptop. First, I emailed our 3 children, asking them to come for Sunday dinner. They deserved to hear the truth from me before Gerald could spin his version of events. Then I called my old college roommate Margaret, who had become one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the state. Maggie, I said, when she answered, I need your help. Eleanor, what's wrong? Gerald's been having an affair with his assistant. He's been moving money, preparing to leave me. Margaret's voice hardened. That bastard. Tell me everything. As I recounted the details, Margaret's occasional profanity was oddly comforting. By the time I finished, she was in full battle mode. And Eleanor, she paused, we're going to take him for everything he's worth. I don't want revenge, Maggie, I said, though part of me did. I just want what's fair. Fair? She scoffed. He forfeited fair when he started hiding money and sleeping with his assistant. Now we go for justice. After we hung up, I sat in Gerald's leather chair, surrounded by the trappings of the life we'd built together. On the wall hung family photos, spanning decades our wedding, the children's graduations, family vacations, the birth of each grandchild. Gerald's face smiled out from each one, the man I thought I knew. But I'd been married to a stranger, it seemed, a man capable of systematic deception, of calculated betrayal. A man who could look at 42 years of marriage and see only what he wanted to leave behind. Well, 2 could play at that game. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and removed the false bottom Gerald didn't know I knew about. Inside was a flash drive, his emergency backup of all financial records, passwords, and account information. I plugged it into the computer and began to copy everything. Gerald had taught me another lesson over our years together. Always have a contingency plan. It was time to create mine. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and bank visits and difficult conversations with our children. But tonight, in the quiet of our homey home now, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened and what was to come. At 67, I was starting over. The thought was terrifying. But as I looked at the evidence I'd gathered and the notes I'd made, another feeling began to emerge: a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. Gerald thought he was walking away with everything. He was about to learn that he'd underestimated the woman who had stood beside him for 42 years. The woman who had watched and learned and absorbed every lesson about money and power that he'd never thought to hide from her. The woman who was now going to use those lessons against him. The Sunday dinner with our children loomed before me, like both a refuge and a reckoning. I spent Saturday preparing, chopping vegetables for the beef stew that had been our family's comfort food through every crisis, kneading dough for the crusty bread that Michael, Jennifer, and Thomas had always fought over at the table. My hands worked automatically while my mind raced through what I would say, how I would explain that their father, the man they had idolized their entire lives, had betrayed us all. The house felt cavernous without Gerald. 42 years of marriage meant 42 years of sounds I'd grown accustomed to. His heavy footsteps on the stairs, the rustle of his newspaper, the particular way he cleared his throat before making a point he thought was especially clever. Now there was only silence, punctuated by my own movements and the occasional ping of my phone as Margaret sent another document requiring my signature or attention. I hadn't heard from Gerald since he'd walked out the door 2 nights before. No calls, no texts, not even an email. His silence spoke volumes. He'd made his choice, and it wasn't me, wasn't our family, wasn't the life we'd built together over 4 decades. The children arrived within minutes of each other on Sunday, a small miracle given their busy lives. Michael came first, his wife Stephanie and their 2 children in tow. He hugged me tightly, holding on a beat too long, and I knew he suspected something was wrong. Jennifer arrived next with her husband Paul, their teenage daughter Emma trailing behind, eyes glued to her phone. Thomas, our youngest, came last, alone as he had been since his divorce 3 years earlier. "That's something I need to talk to all of you about," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "But first, let's eat." Throughout dinner, I maintained a facade of normalcy, asking about work projects and school activities, serving seconds and thirds, pouring wine for the adults and sparkling cider for the grandchildren. But I could feel their eyes on me, noting Gerald's empty chair, exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. After dessert apple crumble, another family tradition, I asked Stephanie if she would take the grandchildren to the den to watch a movie. Her eyes met mine with understanding, and she quickly ushered them out, closing the dining room doors behind her. "Mom, what's going on?" Jennifer asked the moment we were alone. "Where's Dad?" I took a deep breath. "Your father has been having an affair with his executive assistant, Lisa Mercer. He's been planning to leave me for some time, systematically moving our assets to accounts in his name only. I confronted him on Friday night, and he's gone to be with her." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face hardened into a mask reminiscent of his father's. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Thomas simply stared, his expression unreadable. "That's not possible," Michael said finally. "Dad wouldn't." "I have proof," I said quietly, and proceeded to lay out everything I discovered: the text messages, the financial transfers, the private investigators' photos. With each piece of evidence, I watched their faces change, disbelief giving way to shock, then anger. "That son of a bitch," Thomas muttered, his hands clenching into fists on the table. "I'm going to kill him," Michael said, half rising from his chair. "Mom, he's stealing from you," Jennifer protested. "From all of us, our inheritance." "Is the least of my concerns right now," I finished for her. "What matters is securing my future, and that's why I've asked you here. I need your support, but not your intervention. I've already engaged Margaret Sullivan as my attorney." "Aunt Maggie?" Thomas looked surprised. They'd all grown up calling my college friends aunt and uncle, though there was no blood relation. She's one of the best divorce attorneys in the state, I reminded them. And she's already put together a team to track down every penny your father has moved. What can we do? Michael asked, his financial mind clearly already working on the problem. First, I need you all to understand that this is between your father and me. He's still your father, and whatever happens between us shouldn't change that relationship. Jennifer made a scoffing sound. He betrayed you, Mom. He betrayed all of us. Yes, I agreed. But holding on to anger will only hurt you in the long run. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you not to let his actions poison your lives. That's very enlightened of you, Thomas said, his voice tinged with bitterness. But I'm not sure I can be that generous. I reached across the table and took his hand. Thomas had always been the most sensitive of my children, the one who felt things most deeply. His own divorce had left scars that were still healing. This isn't about generosity, I said. It's about survival. I need to focus on securing my future, not on punishing your father. And how exactly are you planning to do that? Michael asked. I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. That's where I could use your help. Over the next hour, I outlined my plan. Michael, with his financial expertise, would help me trace the money Gerald had moved. Jennifer, who had followed me into education and was now a college administrator, would help me update my resume and explore part-time work opportunities. Thomas, who had inherited his father's head for business but had chosen to channel it into nonprofit work, would help me understand the tax implications of divorce at my age. Mom, Michael said when I'd finished, you don't need to work, once we find where Dad hid the money. I may not need to financially, I agreed, but I need to for me. I've been Gerald's wife for so long that I've forgotten who Eleanor Harrington is when she stands alone. Jennifer squeezed my hand. You're the strongest woman I know, Mom. You'll figure it out. We're with you, Thomas added. Whatever you need. After they left, promises of support and daily check-ins ringing in the air, I sat alone at the dining room table. The house felt different now, not empty, but full of possibility. For the first time since discovering Gerald's betrayal, I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. That feeling was short-lived. The next morning, I received a call from Margaret. Eleanor, Gerald's made his first move, she said without preamble. He's filed for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences, and he's asking for an equitable distribution of assets. Equitable? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. After what he's already taken. Exactly. His attorney is claiming that since Gerald was the primary breadwinner, he's entitled to the majority of the assets. They're also arguing that the business growth during your marriage was due solely to his efforts. That's ridiculous, I said, anger flaring. I supported him through the early years when the firm was barely breaking even. I raised our children so he could work 80-hour weeks. I managed our household, our social calendar, our entire life while he built his career. Margaret paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. Gerald's attorney is suggesting that since you're beyond employment age and have no recent work history, your needs are minimal compared to his ongoing business obligations. Beyond employment age? I repeated, the words striking like physical blows. I'm 67, not dead. It's a tactic, Eleanor. They're trying to minimize your contributions and your future needs, but we're not going to let them get away with it. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the garden where I'd first seen that fateful text message, beyond employment age. The phrase echoed in my head, each repetition stoking my anger. Gerald wasn't just trying to leave May, he was trying to erase me, to reduce 4 decades of partnership to a footnote in his life story. Well, I wasn't going to let that happen. I spent the next week in a whirlwind of activity. With Michael's help, I began tracking down the missing money, documenting every transfer Gerald had made. Jennifer helped me update my resume, emphasizing my teaching experience and community volunteer work. Thomas introduced me to his friend at the local community center, who offered me a part-time position teaching English as a second language. Mrs. Harrington, the program director said during our interview, your experience is exactly what we're looking for. When can you start? Next week, I said without hesitation. The salary was modest, a fraction of what Gerald spent on golf club memberships, but it was mine, earned by me, for me. Meanwhile, Margaret's team was building our case. The more they dug, the more they uncovered. Gerald hadn't just been moving money, he'd been systematically undervaluing assets, hiding investment returns, and creating a paper trail that minimized his net worth. He's been planning this for at least 2 years, Margaret told me during one of our daily calls. Maybe longer. 2 years. The realization hit me like a physical blow. 2 years ago, we'd celebrated our 40th anniversary with a lavish party. Gerald had stood before our friends and family, raising a toast to 40 years with the most patient, loving woman a man could ask for. Had he already been seeing Lisa then? Had he already been planning his exit strategy while publicly proclaiming his devotion? The betrayal cut deeper with each new discovery. It wasn't just the affair, it was the calculated deception, the methodical dismantling of our shared life while maintaining a facade of commitment. But I wasn't the only one making discoveries. 3 weeks after Gerald left, Jennifer called me, her voice tight with anger. Mom, you need to see this. An hour later, she arrived at the house with her laptop. Dad's been posting on social media, she said, opening Facebook. Look. There on the screen was Gerald, smiling broadly on a beach, his arm around Lisa Mercer. The caption read, New beginnings are often disguised as painful endings, starting fresh with the love of my life. The photo had been taken in Belize. I recognized the resort from our own vacation there 5 years earlier. Comments beneath the photo ranged from congratulatory to confused, with several of our mutual friends asking what had happened to me. Gerald had responded to one such comment. Eleanor and I have grown apart over the years. We both deserve happiness in our golden years, and we've decided to find it separately. He's rewriting history, Jennifer said, her voice shaking with rage, making it sound like this was some mutual decision. I stared at the photo, at Gerald's tanned face and Lisa's bikini-clad figure. They looked happy, carefree. While I had been tracking down hidden assets and updating my resume, they had been vacationing at a 5-star resort, spending money that rightfully belonged to both of us. Mom? Jennifer touched my arm. Are you okay? I closed the laptop. I'm fine, I said, and was surprised to find it was mostly true. The photo hurt, yes, but not as much as I might have expected. Perhaps I was growing numb to Gerald's betrayals. Or perhaps I was simply growing stronger. He's showing his true colors, I said after a moment, and that can only help our case. Jennifer looked at me with something like awe. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm, I admitted. I'm furious, but anger won't help me right now, strategy will. And I had been strategizing. With Margaret's guidance, I'd been documenting everything, every social media post, every financial discovery, every conversation with the children about Gerald's behavior. I'd also been quietly reaching out to Gerald's business associates, not to badmouth him, but to ensure they knew my side of the story before he could spin his version. Eleanor, his partner Frank, had said during a lunch I'd invited him to. I had no idea. Gerald told us you two had agreed to separate months ago. That's interesting, I'd replied mildly, considering he only moved out 3 weeks ago after I confronted him about the affair. Frank had looked genuinely shocked. He's been bringing Lisa to client dinners for months, introducing her as his partner. We all assumed. That I knew? That I approved? I shook my head. Frank, Gerald has been systematically moving our joint assets to accounts in his name only. He's been planning to leave me with as little as possible. Does that sound like an amicable separation to you? By the end of our lunch, Frank had promised to review all company records for any irregular financial activities. "I can't believe he would do this," he'd said as we parted. "Not the Gerald I thought I knew." "That makes two of us," I'd replied. Now, looking at Jennifer's worried face, I felt a surge of gratitude for my children's support. They had every right to be devastated by their father's behavior, to retreat into their own pain. Instead, they had rallied around me, offering practical help and emotional support in equal measure. "I'm going to be fine," I told her, and for the first time since this all began, I truly believed it. The next day, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "He doesn't love her. He'll come back to you when he realizes what he's lost." I stared at the message, trying to make sense of it. Then another came through. "I'm sorry. This is Diane Mercer, Lisa's mother. She's making a terrible mistake, and so is your husband." I sat down heavily on the couch. Lisa's mother was texting me. I saved the number and called it. "Mrs. Mercer," I said when she answered. "This is Eleanor Harrington." "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice wavering. "I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but I couldn't just sit by and watch this train wreck." Over the next half hour, Diane Mercer painted a picture that filled in many of the blanks in my understanding. Lisa had been obsessed with Gerald for years, she said. She'd talked about him constantly, convinced that he was unhappy in his marriage and just needed encouragement to leave. "She's always been like this," Diane said, her voice heavy with resignation. "Fixated on men who aren't available, but this time, she actually succeeded in breaking up a marriage, and I just can't be part of it." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Lisa has been planning this for years. She even has a scrapbook." Diane's voice broke. "A scrapbook of your life. Your house, your vacations, your children, everything she wants to take from you." A chill ran through me. "Mrs. Mercer." "Lisa's been accessing Gerald's work accounts, sending emails in his name. I saw her doing it when I visited her apartment last month. She said she was helping him transition to their new life together, but it seemed wrong." My mind raced. If Lisa had been impersonating Gerald in professional communications, that could have serious implications, not just for their relationship, but for his business. "Thank you for telling me this," I said carefully. "Would you be willing to put any of this in writing?" Diane hesitated. "She's still my daughter." "I understand," I said, and I did. No matter what Lisa had done, Diane was still her mother. The protective instinct didn't disappear just because your child made terrible choices. "But Gerald is still my husband, legally, if not emotionally. And what they're doing isn't just hurting Mike, could hurt a lot of people who depend on his firm for their livelihoods. In the meantime, check his professional email." Lisa mentioned something about client communications being redirected. After we hung up, I immediately called Margaret and relayed the conversation. "This could be huge, Eleanor," she said. "If Lisa has been accessing Gerald's professional accounts without authorization, that's potentially criminal. And if client communications have been tampered with, the firm could be facing serious liability issues. What should I do?" "In the meantime, we need to notify Gerald's partners. This goes beyond your divorce. It could affect the entire firm." I called Frank immediately, explaining what Diane had told me. His reaction was immediate and visceral. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "That would explain the Donaldson account. Gerald supposedly emailed them to change the investment strategy, but when I asked him about it in our meeting, he looked completely blank." "Frank, I think you need to do a full audit of all client communications for the past year at least." "Already on it," he said grimly. "And Eleanor, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Whatever's happened between you and Gerald, you didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," I said simply. This isn't about revenge, it's about doing what's right. After hanging up, I sat in Gerald's study, surrounded by the trappings of the life he'd left behind. On his desk was a photo of us from our 35th anniversary trip to France, both of us smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. I picked it up, studying Gerald's face. Had he been happy then? Or had it all been a performance, a role he'd played until a better offer came along? I would probably never know. The man I thought I'd known for 42 years had turned out to be a stranger. But perhaps that was the most important lesson in all of this. I had survived being abandoned by the person I trusted most in the world. I was still standing, still fighting, still moving forward. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Margaret. "Eleanor, we've hit the jackpot," she said without preamble. "Frank just called me. They've found evidence that Lisa has been accessing client accounts, changing investment strategies, even redirecting communications. The firm is in full crisis mode." "What does this mean for us?" "It means Gerald has much bigger problems than your divorce now. The firm could face lawsuits, regulatory investigations, even criminal charges depending on what else they find. And given that Lisa did this while working as his assistant, with his passwords, he's potentially liable for all of it." I leaned back in Gerald's chair, processing this information. "So, what's our next move?" "We wait," Margaret said. "Let Gerald stew in the mess he's created. Meanwhile, we continue building our case. But Eleanor, this significantly strengthens our position. Gerald can't afford a protracted legal battle on multiple fronts. He's going to want to settle, and quickly." After we hung up, I walked to the window overlooking the garden. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, their blue and purple heads nodding in the summer breeze. I had planted those bushes 30 years ago, nurturing them through seasons of drought and frost, watching them grow from fragile saplings to the lush shrubs they were now. Like those hydrangeas, I had weathered my own seasons of hardship, and like them, I was still here, still blooming despite it all. Gerald had underestimated me. He'd seen only what he wanted to see: an aging wife who could be discarded when convenient, a partner whose contributions could be minimized and forgotten. He'd failed to recognize the strength that had been building in me through 42 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and countless challenges overcome. That was his mistake. And now, he would pay for it not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved justice, because the life we'd built together was as much my creation as his. Because I refused to be erased from my own story. The woman who had stood in this garden 6 weeks ago, trembling at the discovery of a text message not meant for her eyes, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth in a way she never had before. Gerald had left me for his mistress, thinking he could take everything we'd built together. He was about to discover how wrong he had been. The first frost of October painted the garden with silver. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug warming my hands, watching the morning light transform ordinary plants into crystalline sculptures. 6 months had passed since that day in April when a single text message had shattered my world. 6 months of legal maneuvers, financial investigations, and emotional reckonings. 6 months of rebuilding myself from the ground up. My phone chimed with a text from Margaret. "Meeting with Gerald's attorneys at 2. Brace yourself, they're desperate." I smiled into my coffee. Desperate was an understatement. In the months since Lisa's unauthorized access to client accounts had been discovered, Gerald's professional life had imploded spectacularly. The firm had conducted a thorough audit, revealing that Lisa had altered investment strategies for several major clients, redirected communications, and even impersonated Gerald in emails to colleagues. The regulatory investigation was ongoing, but the damage to Gerald's reputation was already severe. 3 major clients had pulled their accounts. The the firm's partners had voted to place Gerald on administrative leave, pending the investigation's outcome. And Lisa, facing potential criminal charges, had turned on Gerald, claiming she'd acted under his direction, a claim he vehemently denied. Their paradise had crumbled remarkably quickly. I set down my coffee and walked to the study, where stacks of financial documents covered what had once been Gerald's desk. With Michael's help, I'd traced most of the money Gerald had moved. Some had already been returned to joint accounts by court order. The rest was frozen until our divorce was finalized. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer standing on the porch, a bakery box in her hands. "Mom!" She hugged me tightly when I opened the door. "I brought breakfast. Thought you might need fortification before the meeting." "You didn't have to do that," I said, though I was grateful for both the pastries and the company. "Of course I did. It's not every day your mother gets to watch her cheating father squirm." She set the box on the kitchen counter and began unpacking almond croissants, me favorite. "Have you heard from Dad?" "Not directly," I said, putting on fresh coffee. "Only through his attorneys." "And Lisa?" I shook my head. Not a word since she turned on him. According to Margaret, they've had a rather dramatic falling out. Jennifer snorted. "Shocking. Turns out the woman who helped a married man betray his wife of 42 years isn't exactly loyal." "Indeed." I took a bite of croissant, savoring the buttery layers. "How's Emma doing with all this?" Jennifer's expression softened at the mention of her daughter. "Better, I think. She was so angry at first, we all were, but she started talking about him again, asking if she can see him." "She should," I said firmly. "Whatever Gerald has done to me, he's still her grandfather." "That's what Paul says too." Jennifer sighed. "I'm just not there yet, Mom. Every time I think about what he did to you." "Then don't think about it," I interrupted gently. "Think about the father who taught you to ride a bike and checked under your bed for monsters. That man still exists, Jennifer. He's just made some terrible choices." "How can you be so forgiving?" I considered this as I sipped my coffee. "I'm not sure I have forgiven him," I admitted, "but I'm trying to separate the man I loved for 42 years from the man who betrayed me. One doesn't negate the other." Jennifer studied me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're remarkable, you know that. If Paul ever did something like this, let's hope you never have to find out how you'd handle it," I said with a small smile. "Now, tell me about your new curriculum proposal. Last time we spoke, the dean was being difficult." We spent the next hour talking about Jennifer's work, Emma's college applications, and my English classes at the community center. Normal life continuing despite the extraordinary circumstances, small miracle in itself. At 1:30, Jennifer hugged me goodbye, making me promise to call after the meeting. I changed into the navy blue suit I'd bought specifically for these legal confrontations, my armor against Gerald's attempts to diminish me. Margaret was waiting outside her office building when my taxi arrived. At 65, she was a formidable prehensile silver hair cut in a sharp bob, tailored charcoal suit, and a gaze that had made opposing counsel wither during 4 decades of legal practice. "Ready for this?" she asked as we rode the elevator to the conference room. "More than ready," I replied. "What exactly are they offering?" "They've come up with a settlement proposal. Gerald keeps the Florida condo and his company shares. You get the house, half the investment portfolio, and a monthly maintenance payment." She named a figure that made my eyebrows rise. "It's less than you deserve, but more than I expected them to offer at this stage." "And what do they want in return?" Margaret's lips thinned. "A confidentiality agreement. Gerald doesn't want the details of his affair or the financial manipulations made public. He's especially concerned about the professional ethics implications." "I see." I smoothed my skirt as the elevator doors opened. "And what do you recommend?" "Hear them out, consider the offer, but don't agree to anything today. She squeezed my arm. Remember, we have leverage. The firm's investigation has uncovered more than Gerald realizes. Gerald was already seated at the conference table when we entered, flanked by his attorney, a sleek man in his 40s with an expensive haircut and a practiced smile. Gerald himself looked diminished somehow. The 6 months since he'd left had aged him visibly. His face was thinner, with new lines around his mouth and eyes. The confident posture I'd known for decades was gone, replaced by a slight stoop that spoke of recent burdens. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw something flicker across his face: regret, shame. It was gone too quickly to identify. "Mrs. Harrington," his attorney began, "thank you for meeting with us today. We believe we have a settlement offer that will be satisfactory to all parties." "Miss Sullivan and I will be the judge of that," I replied calmly, taking my seat across from Gerald. The attorney, David Whitman, according to the business card he slid across the table, outlined the proposal Margaret had already summarized. As he spoke, I watched Gerald. He kept his eyes fixed on the table, occasionally nodding as Whitman highlighted particular points. "Additionally," Whitman concluded, "Mr. Harrington is prepared to assume full responsibility for any liabilities arising from Miss Points-Frum's Mercer's actions at the firm, shielding you from any potential financial implications." "How generous," Margaret said dryly, "considering Eleanor had nothing to do with those actions in the first place." Whitman smiled tightly. "We're simply being thorough. Now, regarding the confidentiality agreement." "Before we discuss that," Margaret interrupted, "there are a few matters we'd like to address." She opened her briefcase and removed a folder. "Specifically, the $2 million Mr. Harrington transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands 3 years ago." Gerald's head snapped up. "That's not part of the marital assets," Margaret finished for him. "That's interesting, because we have documentation showing the money came directly from your joint investment portfolio. Money that Eleanor contributed to throughout your marriage." Whitman leaned over to whisper something to Gerald, who shook his head sharply. "We also have questions about the property in Aspen," Margaret continued, removing another document from her folder. "Purchased 2 years ago through a shell company, but ultimately traced back to you, Mr. Harrington." Gerald's face had gone pale. "How did you find out?" I spoke for the first time since the initial greeting. "Did you really think I wouldn't? That I'd simply accept whatever crumbs you decided to leave me after 42 years of marriage?" "Eleanor," Gerald began, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. For months I've watched you attempt to rewrite our history. You've told your friends, your colleagues, even our children, that our marriage had been failing for years. That we'd grown apart, that your relationship with Lisa was something that developed naturally after you and I had already separated emotionally." I leaned forward, holding his gaze. "But we both know that's a lie. We both know you were planning your exit for years, systematically moving assets, creating your escape route while continuing to play the role of devoted husband." "That's not," he started, but I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "We both know you introduced Lisa as your partner at client dinners while I was at home, waiting for you. We both know you took her to our special Places the Resort in Belize, the restaurant in New York where we celebrated our 30th anniversary. We both know you gave her access to your professional accounts, putting your entire firm at risk." Gerald's face had gone from pale to ashen. "I never gave her access," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She must have taken my passwords. Must have." "Must have what, Gerald? Decided on her own to impersonate you in professional communications? Altered client investment strategies without your knowledge? For what purpose?" He had no answer. "I think you were so infatuated with the attention from a younger woman that you got careless. I think you left your passwords where she could find them, maybe even shared confidential information to impress her." I think you were so focused on your new life that you neglected your professional responsibilities. That's speculation, Whitman interjected, but his objection lacked conviction. Is it? Margaret countered, pulling another document from her folder. We have statements from 3 of Gerald's colleagues describing instances where Lisa accessed information she shouldn't have had, information that could only have come from Gerald. They're trying to save themselves, Gerald protested, shifting blame. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But the pattern is clear, Gerald. You sacrificed everything: our marriage, your professional ethics, your relationship with our children for a fantasy that collapsed within months. For the first time, genuine emotion broke through Gerald's carefully maintained facade. You think I don't know that? He demanded, his voice cracking. You think I don't regret every decision I've made in the past 3 years? I think your regrets began when the consequences caught up with you, I replied evenly. Not before. The room fell silent. Even Whitman seemed at a loss for words. Finally, Margaret spoke. We're prepared to counter your settlement offer, she said, sliding a document across the table. Mrs. Harrington will retain the house and 70% of the investment portfolio, reflecting her contributions to the marriage and Mr. Harrington's attempts to hide assets. She'll also receive 50% of the value of the Cayman Islands account and the Aspen property. Whitman scanned the document, his expression carefully neutral. And the confidentiality agreement? Mrs. Harrington will agree not to publicly discuss the details of your financial arrangements or Ms. Mercer's actions at the firm, Margaret said, but she reserves the right to speak truthfully about the circumstances of your separation to friends and family. That's not acceptable, Whitman began, but Gerald cut him off. It's fine, he said quietly. She's right. I can't ask her to lie about what I did. Whitman looked as though he wanted to object further, but something in Gerald's expression stopped him. We'll need to review these terms, he said instead. Of course, Margaret replied smoothly. We'll expect your response within 48 hours. As we gathered our things to leave, Gerald stood abruptly. Eleanor, can I speak with you? Alone? Margaret gave me a questioning look. I nodded slightly, and she exited with Whitman, leaving Gerald and me facing each other across the conference table. What is it, Gerald? I asked when the door closed behind them. He seemed to deflate, sinking back into his chair. I wanted to say I'm sorry, not just for the affair, but for everything, for betraying your trust, for trying to take what wasn't rightfully mine, for hurting our family. I studied him, this man I'd shared my life with for over 4 decades. The man who'd held my hand through 3 childbirths, who'd nursed me through breast cancer, who'd built a life with me brick by brick, only to try to dismantle it without warning. Why? I asked simply. Why, Lisa? Why any of it? Gerald ran a hand over his face. I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense. She made me feel young again, yes, but it was more than that. With you, I was always Gerald the provider, Gerald the responsible one. With her, I could be someone else, someone without the weight of 40 years of expectations. And that was worth destroying everything we built? No, he said immediately. Nothing was worth that. I see that now. Now that she's turned on you, now that your career is in jeopardy, now that our children can barely stand to look at you. He flinched at each question. I deserve that, he acknowledged, all of it and more. But Eleanor, you have to believe me when I say I never meant for things to go this far. The money, I was just trying to create a safety net. And Lisa accessing my accounts, I never authorized that. But you didn't stop it either. I pointed out. You must have known something was wrong. Client communications being redirected, investment strategies changing without your input. These aren't small oversights, Gerald. He looked down at his hands. I was distracted, careless. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. It's been too late from the moment you decided our marriage was disposable, I said, rising from my chair. From the moment you decided 2 years of partnership could be erased for a fantasy of youth and freedom. Eleanor, please. Please, what, Gerald, forgive you? Forget what you've done? Take you back? I shook my head. I can't do any of those things. Not now, maybe not ever. I understand, he said, and for once I believed him. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with her, even when I was making the worst mistakes of my life, some part of me still loved you. That makes it worse, not better, I said quietly. Love without loyalty, without respect, without honesty, that's not love at all. That's just a word you're using to make yourself feel better about what you've done. Not because I want to make this easy for you, but because I want it over. I want to move forward with my life, a life that no longer includes you. And the children? He asked, his voice breaking. Will they ever forgive me? I turned back to look at him one last time. That's between you and them. I won't stand in the way of their relationship with you, but I won't facilitate it either. You'll have to rebuild those bridges yourself, Gerald, if you can. With that, I left the room, closing the door firmly behind me. Margaret was waiting in the hallway. Everything okay? Yes, I said, and was surprised to find it was true. I think we finally reached an understanding. As we rode the elevator down to the lobby, Margaret studied me with concern. You look different, she observed. Lighter somehow. I feel lighter, I admitted. For months, I've been carrying this anger, this hurt. Seeing him, today seeing what he's become, I realized something. What's that? He's punishing himself far more effectively than I ever could. The man sitting in that conference room isn't the Gerald who left me 6 months ago. He's a shadow, hollowed out by his own choices. Margaret nodded thoughtfully as we exited the building. And how do you feel about that? I considered the question as we walked to her car. Sad, I said finally. Sad for the man he was, for the life we had, but also relieved. Relieved that I don't have to carry the weight of his betrayal anymore. I can set it down and walk away. That's wisdom, Eleanor. The kind that comes from surviving something you thought would break you. I smiled at my old friend. It nearly did break me. There were days I didn't think I could get out of bed, let alone fight for what was rightfully mine. But you did, she reminded me. And now look at you teaching again, reconnecting with old friends, planning a trip to Europe next spring. You're building a new life piece by piece. I am, I agreed. And for the first time in months, I'm actually excited about what comes next. That evening, I sat in the garden as twilight settled over the neighborhood. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of late roses. My phone chimed with texts from all 3 children checking in after hearing about the meeting. I responded to each one, reassuring them that everything had gone as well as could be expected. Thomas was the last to reply. Proud of you, Mom. Dad made his choices. Now he has to live with them. Out of all my children, Thomas had been the most deeply hurt by Gerald's betrayal. His own divorce had left him wary of relationships, and seeing his father, the man he'd always admired and emulated, behave in such a way, had shaken him profoundly. We all make choices, I texted back. The important thing is what we do afterward. As I set my phone down, I thought about the choices that had brought me to this moment. Gerald had chosen betrayal, Lisa had chosen deception, but I had chosen resilience. I had chosen to fight rather than surrender, to rebuild rather than retreat. And now, sitting in the garden I'd tended for decades, I was making another choice, to embrace this new chapter of my life, whatever it might hold. To step forward into the unknown, with courage and curiosity rather than fear. The woman I'd been 6 months ago could never have imagined this moment. She defined herself primarily as Gerald's wife, as the matriarch of their family. She'd believed that at 67, the shape of her life was fixed, immutable. How wrong she had been. At 67, I was discovering that life could still surprise me, that I was stronger, more resilient, more capable than I'd ever realized. That the end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story, it was simply the beginning of a new chapter. Gerald had left me for his mistress, thinking he could take everything we'd built together. Instead, he lost everything that truly mattered: his integrity, his family's respect, his professional standing. And I, the woman he'd discarded so carelessly, was emerging from the wreckage, not diminished, but enlarged. Not erased, but illuminated. Not ended, but beginning anew. The settlement papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, delivered by courier to my front door. I signed for the thick envelope with steady hands, though my heart raced as I carried it into the kitchen. For 9 months, my life had been in limbo, not quite married, not quite divorced, suspended between the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. These papers would finalize that transition. I made a cup of tea before opening the envelope, a small ritual to mark the moment. The china cup had been a gift from Gerald on our 35th anniversary Wedgwood, with delicate blue flowers that matched the hydrangeas in our garden. Using it felt like reclaiming a piece of my past for my future. The documents inside were intimidatingly thick, full of legal language and financial details that would have overwhelmed me 9 months ago. Now I read through them methodically, noting the division of assets, the maintenance payments, the official dissolution of 42 years of marriage reduced to paragraphs and subsections. Everything was as Margaret and I had negotiated. The house was mine. 70% of our investment portfolio was mine. Half the value of the hidden Cayman Islands account and the Aspen property was mine. The monthly maintenance payment was generous, more than I needed, especially with my teaching income. Gerald had conceded on every point. I signed where indicated, my signature strong and clear: Eleanor Harrington, not Eleanor Harrington Wilson. I had decided to reclaim my maiden name, another step in reclaiming myself. As I sealed the signed documents in the return envelope, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he said without preamble, "have you seen the news?" "What news?" "About Dad's firm. It's all over the financial sites. The SEC has filed charges against Lisa Mercer for securities fraud. They're alleging she manipulated client accounts for personal gain while working as Dad's assistant." I set down my tea, suddenly alert. "What about your father? Is he being charged?" "Not criminally, at least not yet. But the firm has asked for his resignation, effective immediately. The press release says he's stepping down to address personal matters and cooperate fully with ongoing investigations." I closed my eyes, absorbing this information. Gerald had built that firm from nothing, had poured 40 years of his life into it. Now his name was being stripped from the door, his legacy tainted by scandal. "Mom, are you okay?" "Yes," I said, opening my eyes. "Just processing. Have you spoken to him?" "Not yet. Jennifer tried calling, but he's not answering. Thomas is actually on his way to Dad's apartment now to check on him." That surprised me. Of all our children, Thomas had been the most resistant to reconnecting with Gerald. That's good of him. He said something about not letting Dad go through this alone, no matter what he's done. Michael's voice held a mixture of admiration and concern. "Do you think? Should we be worried?" I understood what he was asking. Gerald had lost everything: his marriage, his career, his reputation. The foundations of his identity had crumbled beneath him. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm glad Thomas is going to him. Your father needs family right now, even if he doesn't deserve it." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the signed settlement papers. Part of Maya, small, vindictive part I wasn't proud of, felt a surge of satisfaction at Gerald's professional downfall. He had betrayed not just me, but the principles he'd claimed to live by throughout his career. Now he was facing the consequences. But the larger part of me, the part that had loved him for more than 4 decades, felt only sadness. Sadness for the man he had been, for the life he had thrown away, for the family that would never be whole again. My phone rang again. This time, it was Thomas. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I'm at Dad's apartment. It's bad." My heart clenched. "What do you mean? Is he hurt?" I closed my eyes, picturing Gerald always so meticulous, so put together living in squalor, drowning his sorrows in alcohol. Is he talking about hurting himself? Not explicitly, but I'm worried, Mom. I've never seen him like this. Mom, you don't have to. I changed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater, running a brush through my silver hair. As I gathered my purse and keys, I caught sight of myself in the hall mirror. The woman who looked back at me was not the same one who had stood in this spot 9 months ago, devastated by betrayal. This woman's eyes held strength, determination, and a hard-won wisdom. Gerald's apartment was in a luxury building downtown, the kind of place that catered to wealthy divorcees and corporate executives, saw gleaming surfaces and impersonal elegance. Thomas was waiting in the lobby when I arrived. "He doesn't know you're coming," he warned as we rode the elevator to the 22nd floor. "That's probably for the best," I replied. The apartment, when Thomas unlocked the door, was exactly as he'd described: a disaster. Takeout containers littered the coffee table, empty whiskey bottles stood like sentinels on the kitchen counter, and the air was stale with the smell of unwashed clothes and despair. Gerald himself was slumped in an armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city below. He didn't turn when we entered, didn't acknowledge our presence until Thomas spoke. "Dad, Mom's here." Then he turned, and the sight of him shocked me to my core. In the 2 months since I'd seen him at the settlement meeting, Gerald had aged a decade. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. Several days' worth of stubble covered his chin, and his hair, always so carefully styled, stuck up in unruly tufts. "Eleanor?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "What are you doing here?" Thomas was concerned, I said simply, setting my purse on a clean spot on the counter. And now I can see why. Gerald looked away, shame evident in every line of his body. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have to see me like this." "Probably not." I agreed. "But here I am." I turned to Thomas. "Why don't you go get some groceries? Your father needs real food, not whatever he's been subsisting on." Thomas hesitated, looking between us. "Are you sure?" "We'll be fine," I assured him. "We have 42 years of practice at being in the same room together." After Thomas left, I moved methodically around the apartment, opening windows to let in fresh air, gathering empty bottles and food containers, straightening what I could. Gerald watched me in silence, making no move to help, but offering no objection either. Finally, when I'd cleared enough space to sit on the sofa across from him, I spoke. "I signed the settlement papers this morning." He nodded dully. "So it's official." "It will be once you sign your copies and they're filed with the court." "And then what?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You go on with your life, and what? Fade away into disgrace?" "That depends on you," I said evenly. "You can continue this." I gestured at the state of the apartment, at his disheveled appearance, "or you can find a way forward." "Forward to what, Eleanor? My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. My own children can barely look at me." He picked up a half-empty tumbler from the side table and took a swallow. "Even Lisa has turned against me, telling the investigators I knew everything she was doing." "Did you?" I asked quietly. He set the glass down with a thud. Not at first, but yes, eventually I suspected. I just didn't want to see it. Didn't want to admit that I'd made such a catastrophic error in judgment. So you looked the other way while she compromised your professional ethics and put your client's money at risk. Yes. The admissions seemed to cost him physically. He seemed to shrink further into the chair. Just like I looked the other way while she encouraged me to hide assets from you. While she pushed me to leave before you could discover what we were doing. I absorbed this in silence. Part of me had always wondered how much of the deception had been Gerald's idea, and how much had been Lisa's influence. Not that it mattered in the end. He was a grown man who had made his own choices. "Why are you really here, Eleanor?" he asked after a long moment. It can't be just because Thomas was worried. I considered the question, searching for the honest answer. "I suppose I needed to see for myself," I said finally. "To see what's become of the man I spent most of my life with." "And now that you've seen?" His eyes met mine, bloodshot but clear. "Are you satisfied with my downfall?" "No," I said truthfully. "I take no pleasure in seeing you like this, Gerald. Despite everything, I wouldn't wish this kind of despair on anyone, least of all the father of my children." He looked away, tears welling in his eyes. "I've lost everything that matters." "Yes, you have," I agreed, not unkindly. "But that doesn't mean your life is over. It means you have to build something new from the ashes of what you destroyed." I wouldn't even know where to begin. "You could start by getting sober," I suggested. "Then maybe reach out to your children. Really reach out, not with excuses or self-pity, but with genuine remorse and a desire to make amends." "And you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Is there any chance that someday—" "No," I interrupted gently but firmly. "Not in the way you're asking. Too much has happened, Gerald. Too many lies, too many betrayals. I can perhaps someday find my way to forgiveness, but reconciliation? No." He nodded, accepting this with a resignation that told me he'd already known the answer. "I don't deserve forgiveness either." "Deserving has nothing to do with it," I said. "Forgiveness isn't earned, it's given. And it's given not because the person who hurt you deserves it, but because you deserve peace." Before he could respond, the door opened, and Thomas returned with several bags of groceries. He looked between us, assessing the atmosphere. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, rising from the sofa. "Your father and I have had a good talk. Now, let's get some real food into him." The three of us moved to the kitchen, where I directed the clearing of counter space and the unpacking of groceries. As we worked, I noticed Thomas watching his father with a mixture of concern and lingering anger. Gerald, for his part, seemed to be making an effort standing straighter, focusing on the tasks I assigned him, even attempting small talk. It was a fragile beginning, this tentative reconnection between father and son, but it was a beginning nonetheless. After we'd prepared a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast the limit of what Gerald's stomach could likely handle after days of alcohol, I announced my intention to leave. "You don't have to go yet," Thomas said, looking uncomfortable at the prospect of being alone with his father. "Yes, I do," I replied, gathering my purse. "You two have a lot to talk about, and I have plans this evening." This was true. I had dinner scheduled with a book club I'd joined 2 months earlier, 5 women around my age, all with their own stories of resilience and reinvention. Women who had become friends, not because of who my husband was or what social circles we moved in, but because of who I was. At the door, Gerald spoke my name softly. "Eleanor." I turned one hand on the doorknob. "Yes?" "Thank you," he said simply, "for coming today. For everything." I nodded once, acknowledging his gratitude without accepting the weight of it. "Goodbye, Gerald." As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I felt a curious lightness. I had faced my greatest fear, seeing Gerald broken, Hearing him express regret and discovered it held no power over me. I could feel compassion for him without being drawn back into his orbit. I could wish him healing without taking responsibility for providing it. I was, finally, and completely, free. The book club dinner that evening was at an Italian restaurant I'd never visited during my marriage to Gerald. The women greeted me warmly, pulling me into conversations about the novel we'd read, about their lives, about mine. "You look different tonight," observed Diane, a retired professor who had divorced her husband after 30 years when she discovered his gambling addiction had drained their savings. "More settled somehow." I smiled, twirling pasta around my fork. "I signed my divorce papers this morning, and I saw my ex-husband this afternoon." "Voluntarily?" asked Meredith, widowed at 58 after nursing her husband through a long illness. "My son was concerned about him. He's not handling the divorce or the professional scandal well." "And you went to him?" Diane looked incredulous. "After everything he did?" I considered how to explain the complex emotions of the day. I went for my son, and for myself, in a way. I needed to see that Gerald no longer had any hold over Menot through love, not through guilt, not through any lingering sense of responsibility. "And did you?" asked Sophia, the youngest of our group at 62, who had left her husband after their children were grown, realizing she'd spent decades in a marriage that fulfilled his dreams while deferring her own. "Yes," I said with quiet certainty. "I saw a broken man who made terrible choices and is now facing the consequences. I felt compassion for him, but not obligation, not anymore." "To liberation," Meredith said, raising her wineglass in a toast. "To new beginnings," added Diane. "To women who refuse to be erased," Sophia concluded. We clinked glasses, these women and I, each of us carrying our own stories of loss and renewal, of endings and beginnings. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in the house that was now legally mine alone, my phone chimed with a text from Thomas. "He's agreed to get help, checking him into a treatment center tomorrow." "Thank you, Mom." I texted back a simple heart emoji, then set my phone aside. Gerald's recovery was his own journey now, one I could observe from a distance, but would not participate in directly. My focus was on my own path forward. That path had become increasingly clear over the past 9 months. My part-time teaching position had expanded to include a creative writing workshop for seniors. I'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I'd even, to my own surprise, begun dating nothing serious. Just occasional dinners with a widowed history professor Jennifer had introduced me to. Most importantly, I'd rediscovered parts of myself that had been subsumed during my marriage. My love of poetry, my interest in local politics, my desire to travel independently. I'd booked a trip to Portugal for the Spring Me First solo international adventure. At 68, I was starting over. The thought no longer terrified me. It exhilarated me. 3 weeks later, on a crisp December morning, I received an unexpected delivery, a small package and a larger envelope, both bearing Gerald's handwriting. I brought them inside and set them on the kitchen table, studying them warily before deciding to open the envelope first. Inside was a letter, written in Gerald's precise hand. "Eleanor, I've enclosed the signed settlement papers. By the time you receive this, they will have been filed with the court, and our divorce will be final. I've also enclosed something that belongs to you, something I took without right or permission when I left. Please accept it as a small gesture of the remorse I feel for all the harm I've caused. I am 2 weeks into a 90-day treatment program. The clarity that comes with sobriety is painful but necessary. Each day, I understand more fully the depth of my betrayal, not just of our marriage vows, but of the trust you placed in me for 42 years. I make no excuses for my behavior. I chose to pursue a fantasy at the expense of reality. I chose to deceive rather than face difficult truths. I chose, again and again, the path of least resistance rather than the path of integrity. You deserved better. You deserved honesty, loyalty, and respect, all of which I failed to provide in the end. I don't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned it. I write only to acknowledge the truth of what I did and to express my profound regret. The children tell me you are flourishing. This gives me more joy than I have any right to feel. If anyone deserves happiness and peace, it is you. With deepest respect and remorse, Gerald. I set the letter aside and opened the small package. Inside was a velvet jewelry box containing my grandmother's sapphire ring and heirloom. I'd thought lost in Gerald's hasty packing 9 months earlier. I'd been too proud to ask about it, assuming he'd either forgotten it or, worse, given it to Lisa. Seeing it now, nestled in its familiar box, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not for Gerald or for our marriage, but for the continuity this ring represented, a link to my past that would now be part of my future, eventually passing to Jennifer or perhaps to Emma. I slipped it onto my finger, where it sat comfortably, as if it had never been gone. Then I picked up my phone and, after a moment's hesitation, typed a brief message to Gerald. "Thank you for returning the ring. I wish you well in your recovery." His response came hours later. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." Those 4 words contained multitudes: acknowledgement, gratitude, closure. I didn't reply, didn't need to. Our conversation, begun 43 years earlier when we'd met at a mutual friend's dinner party, was finally complete. The next morning, I woke early and went out to the garden, where winter had stripped the trees bare and sent the perennials into dormancy. In a few months, spring would bring new growth, the hydrangeas would bud, the roses would climb, the cycle of renewal would continue as it always had. I would be here to see it, to tend it, to witness the garden's transformation from winter barrenness to summer abundance. Just as I would witness my own continuing transformation from the woman I had been defined primarily as Gerald's wife to the woman I was becoming, Eleanor Harrington, whole and complete in herself. Gerald had left me for his mistress, thinking he could take everything we'd built together. Instead, he had inadvertently set me free to discover my own strength, to build a life on my own terms, to claim the independence I hadn't known I wanted until it was thrust upon me. In trying to erase me from his story, he had only succeeded in helping me write my own. And as I stood in the winter garden, my grandmother's ring catching the early morning light, I knew with absolute certainty that my story was just beginning.